if you thought that Gebura's background story was tragic, what you're about to hear from me is going to get worse. Believe me, it will be. Next we have the warp cleanup crew. With typical trains, they have a cleanup crew to clean up any of the mess that the passengers leave behind, along with cleaning the seats and even the toilets to an acceptable level, ready for the next set of passengers going in the other direction. With a warp train, it's different. They need to put the dead passengers back in their seats, even if they're in gory pieces, to make sure that they're restored. This is once the warp train reaches the destination. It needs a bent morality, or at least someone that's used to such sights and smells to last any length of time in that job. I suspect that those fired or retired aren't allowed to leave that job with their memory of what happened there intact. Best case scenario, their memory of W Corp's singularity is removed. Worst case scenario, they're killed to prevent that information leaking. But that's not how it's put officially. Anyway, who are the main players in this section? First we have Rose. She's the one in charge of this group of warp cleanup agents. She knows what W Corp wants the public to think that their singularity is: quick transportation via teleportation. But what it really is, it's restoration of a previous status, regardless of how unrecognizable it is, as long as all of the pieces remain. Where before the journey starts, all of the necessary data is scanned, such as molecular structures, genomic data, memory at the time the journey started, all to be sent to the restoration machine, which reverts everything to a previous state with a press of a button, no matter what the state of the individual at the end of the journey. It at least explains what the seatbelts are for, to make sure that they don't move too much as the scanner has problems scanning life forms that move around a lot. There are some side effects, such as slight alterations such as height or weight. That's not a problem for those that use the warp trains, as it's such a minor change it's dismissed as something psychological or explained by eating too much. There's a reason why the passengers don't remember much of their journey. Think of it as a technology that creates a save state in reality, where no matter how chaotic the journey would get, or how long it would be, by the end of the journey, it's just as simple as pressing a button to load that previous state, preventing a lot of trouble. Except in this case, those within it will have no memory of anything that happened, not even going insane and turning on those they care about. They don't remember a lot due to the restoration machine reverting their memories to the previous state, specifically to just before the journey started. Everything would go on as if nothing happened. Yeah, Rose is clearly one that just focuses on the job, like many corporate drones in that city. Morality has a much lower priority there to, well, simple survival. Certainly as far as Rose is concerned about that. Next we have Leslie. She's one of the cleanup agents that's a local girl. She came from the back streets of District 23, so seeing butchered human remains isn't a huge shocker for her. Basically, if you want someone on the cleanup crew that isn't going to vomit in disgust at the sight of something more fitting of a crime scene in a horror movie, hire a local from one of the recruitment towns that makes the grade. She was also recently recruited. She understands that the passengers need to be in their seats to be restored. This is so that the scanner can detect their genomic data and restore them to their intact and, more importantly, alive state. Basically, the role of the warp cleanup crew is to tidy up the carriages and put the passengers back in their seats, based on their genomic data, so that they could be restored with a press of a button. She learned the truth of W Corp's singularity upon joining that wing. As for any problems, well, there was this one instant when a colour fixer hid their identity and got onto the warp train via economy class. Big mistake. Well, she heard this from one of the more senior cleanup agents. Basically, if you're a colour fixer, you'll either be stopped from boarding or guided to first class, as they're the last kind of people you'd want to be conscious during all that, due to how much destruction they're capable of unleashing under normal circumstances. The same applies to high-ranking associate affiliates. There are enough things to consider as it is with a safe and smooth restoration, without a force of destruction making things difficult. Apparently, most passengers started training under that colour fixer's guidance to attain some kind of enlightenment. Well, it's certainly not any of the colour fixers that I'm aware of so far. The red mist, even at her most lucid and stable, was quite a berserker in battle. And the blue reverberation was crazy before the pianist did his performance. Well, whoever this colour fixer was, the result of this was most of the cleanup agents were pounded into the ground like they were steaks being tenderized before they even got close to the colour fixer. In these circumstances, who does W Corp call to deal with them? They call R Corp, of course, as they're partners with that wing. Like with L Corp, when there was the facility. The Rhino team would cause too much damage to the train itself. W Corp needs those intact, and the Reindeer team would risk frying the brains of any nearby. And that's not good publicity. So the best choice was to send in the fourth pack of the Rabbit team and take them out with effective firearms. Why rabbits, as they're herbivores? Lesty, you have no idea. Hail the rabbit! Next we have Sen. He's another of the warp cleanup crew. He understands how the warp trains really work. It involves the singularity of a fallen wing, one that didn't leave enough of an impression to be remembered. This singularity discovered a way of opening gates between dimensions, rifts in space. They didn't find a way of utilizing this in any useful capacity. It's unclear how this wing fell, but it was known at least well enough for the current incarnation of W Corp to spend quite a bit to purchase it, so that they could use it legally. They eventually found a way of utilizing the ability to make a rip in space into something profitable. It involved entering it and coming back out of it the other end, although they didn't know if it was possible at first. That's where T Corp comes in. They installed a device in the train that collected time within it during the journey, so that not a second passed, not even for the thousands of years that occur within the warp train. Temporal preservation. T Corp uses that time gathered for its own purposes, and W Corp gets a viable transportation method that takes its passengers to any platform in 10 seconds, regardless of distance. With material restoration to help out, of course. Oh yes, and their technology is also weaponized. They attack those that aren't diplomatic with them by ripping out and tearing off chunks from those that threaten them. Which is how it works in battle, of course. Some capabilities need charging up, and that can leave them vulnerable. Oh yes, and as for L Corp disappearing and there being a power crisis, according to the no-name generic cleanup agents, it's not the first time this has happened. Last time, it resulted in higher ticket prices or cutbacks with the amount of trains running. Yeah, before Lobotomy Corporation, L Corp's nest was occupied by another energy company. That company went down, and that resulted in a lack of power. Although, in the case of the L Corp before Lobotomy Corporation, the power supply issue was due to them being stingy with how much they supplied, with strict expectations. It wasn't good business, as their reputation among its partnered companies was about as bad as Joseph Stalin's after he said, "Da, I shall respect the rights of Eastern Europe to fair elections," only to do the opposite after. There's an unwritten rule with psychopaths. Never trust them. Certainly not one that said, "To kill one is a tragedy. To kill 1 million is just a statistic." And that time, it implied that life was worthless. Well, then there was the smoke war. Let's move on to the story before this gets too depressing. At the Warp platform, Warp Train UW-212 had arrived, resulting in the death of all inside it that still remained, due to time returning to normal. An announcement stated its arrival and that it would be available at the terminal in 10 minutes. The cleanup crew with Rose, Leslie, and Sen were ready to enter, to see what mess that train had gotten into that time. Basically, standard procedure, according to Sen. The previous time, all the passengers were sitting in their seats, clasping their hands together. Wait, were they praying for salvation that never came, because divine intervention went on strike in a place where time ceased to exist? Well, according to Leslie, Sen said that was an extremely uncommon occurrence, and that he'd never take a warp train himself. Yeah, Leslie. even if they let him forget about it, as he's fully aware of what goes on in them. Rose then readied them to start the cleanup. Within the messy and gore-filled carriages, Rose ordered Leslie to follow the manual and remember the procedures. Even with the mask on, the stench was so strong. It felt like it was physically stinging her nose. She could identify those that were suicidal as the flesh was spread thin in an attempt to maximize the surface area. The subject was determined to feel as much pain as possible. Sen was impressed by her ability to deal with this without vomiting or fainting at the first job, even with educational footage to give an idea of what to expect. Well, it helps to be a local girl, Sen. Rose knew that already. Yeah, it helps to be from a district where its backstreets are full of cannibals. The red bad would appear to be an exception to this rule, although Leslie seems to be alright as well. She's used to the grotesque. Rose ordered them to identify the genomes in their carriages and place the passengers back in their seats. This then was less clinical with his reaction, with the mushy eye rolling around. He still hadn't gotten used to it, although it's implied that his reaction used to be worse. Leslie believed that cleanup agents go through a memory erasure procedure and get their retirement fund when they quit. She should know that's a lie, as she's from the back streets. According to Sen, it likely involves dragging them to a dark room and killing them, making up the rest of the narrative after. Considering how terrible job security is within the wings. Certainly with J Corp, never mind W Corp, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Although Sen wanted Leslie to keep that to herself, as he's had a poor employee review this time, even though he was joking about that. Leslie considered keeping quiet if he bought her some dinner, specifically some gopchang jianggol. Yeah, sorry if I've butchered the pronunciation. Basically, that's tripe hot pots, a casserole made from boiling cow intestines in a stew with vegetables and seasoning. Different from what I'm familiar with as tripe, as from what I know about it, tripe is the lining of a cow's stomach. That used to be a popular cheap food in the north of England. It seems that the Korean definition of tripe is slightly different. Well, regardless, this scared Sen. Then Leslie told him that they have to do some work now. As they were sorting the genomes, Rose ordered them to stop their work immediately and come with her back to the office. At the Warp Corp office, it was revealed by Leslie that passengers had gone missing. Sen told Leslie to keep it down to prevent others from hearing that, even though they're in a maximum security room. They didn't really give a about the passengers in economy class going missing, as only the first class passengers truly mattered. Rose also considered the fact that they've lost time. They didn't meet the time quota. That's something that risks dismissal, according to Lesty. Warp Corp hasn't had a single incident since it became a wing. Rose told them that the engineers were investigating what was happening. She then pointed them at the surveillance footage, which only records important stuff, based on the emotional flux of people within the warp train. This is going to be pleasant, isn't it? Do the executives of W Corp derive twisted amusement from the highlight reels of the warp train journeys? Well, considering that human meat is popular in the backstreets and how the warp trains work, being a deliberate function, I wouldn't put it past them. I mean, it's even used as education footage. Sen mentioned people merging at some point. Likely referring to Tomeri. Then they spotted those that looked like doctors, those that stitched bodies together so precisely. The cleanup agents would need to tear them apart because of this. Leslie noted that they made Lovetown for themselves. Sen observed the Doctor-ish duo of Jae-yeon and Elena. They were the anchor of that town. The townsfolk, deformed as they were crying when they disappeared due to them being there for as long as they needed to. Leslie didn't know how they got off the train. Well, the footage didn't reveal that. Then they got to the footage of the first class carriage, where Jae-hyun, the puppeteer, was painfully turning those within into puppets, much to their horror, one of the passengers being a board member of U-Corp. As for who he was, as far as they were concerned, he considered it to be the invisible strings doing all that. How the puppets were made, involving stitching their flesh and putting strings on them. And Rose identified him as the puppeteer. He was one with quite a reputation in the backstreets. Graded an urban nightmare class threat. But it's only a matter of time before he's a star of the city after what he did to the VIPs. As for the one that had extreme physical strength, this allowed them to kill 16 W Corp agents. It's unclear which one did that. It could either be him or Lena, who was identified as the Blood Red Knight, a former star of the city that was taken down some time ago. Clearly, whoever did that didn't make sure that they finished the job. The warp cleanup crew had a bad shift due to doing all that on the train that they were in charge of. And the aforementioned missing passengers. Rose pointed out that the puppets, which is how Hana Association designated them, signed the invitation to enter the library, the same kind of invitation that Rose had in her possession. Despite the protestations of both Leslie and Sen, Rose ordered them to sign the invitation to the library. An urban nightmare. Leslie wasn't taking it well, as she worked hard just to barely make it into W Corps. Yeah. They were ordered by those on top to go on a suicide mission, along with a few other cleanup agents. Sen asked what would happen if they refused that order. Rose simply replied that they'd be fired. I suspect that it'd be the least of their problems. Leslie was crying at the thought of what she was getting herself into. For good reasons. Not all of them were known to her. After watching this, Roland received confirmation from what he just watched that the warp trains deliberately worked in the way that he saw, and that W Corp knew everything about that. Well, the guiltiest are those that knew what they did was wrong, and yet didn't do anything about it. Or worse, kept doing it with full knowledge of what they did. Those just following orders. That classic excuse to distance themselves from accountability. He even took warp trains a couple of times before. Angela asked if he remembered anything inside. He didn't. He just admired the marvels of modern technology after getting off the train. Not his view on that now, is it? That's not considering how the employees follow manuals, joke around, even taking care of flesh chunks as casually as a cleaner would with scrubbing the toilets. Angela saw the parallels between Warp Corp and Lobotomy Corporation, although it was intriguing to her to see another wing's mortifying secrets. Angela, mortifying isn't the word I'd use. Vomiting-juicing disgusting is the term that's more accurate. She sees that everyone is the same, doing detestable things simply because it's their work. They have their reasons. Simple survival, fun, a grand purpose. A few don't even need a reason for that kind of insanity. Apathy was a common reaction, as they saw the suffering as not their problem. Roland was not looking forward to the book that was made out of them, but he understands that if the knowledge of the truth of W Corp's singularity got out, W Corp would be well and truly. Which explains why W Corp is sending the cleanup agents on a suicide mission to retrieve that info. Angela was counting on that, as she'd learn more about them. She also takes pride in being upfront. Well, she should also take pride in being honest. Upon arrival, Sen talked about one warp train journey where they made a kingdom on that train. Lovetown was mild compared to that. Treason and schemes were rampant. The kingdom fell into decline, and loyal knights made valiant efforts to save their failing country. Well, if the reality is that terrible, they need such an illusion to make it more bearable. As what happens next, Leslie Well, she wouldn't be able to speak of what was next as Angela appeared to greet them. Rose asked about the puppets. Had they appeared recently? Angela confirmed that they have, and that she knows that they were first-class passengers. Sen was worried by this, asking how much she knew. She ignored this by saying that they could retrieve their books so that no one would learn of the incident, and if they failed, other guests may obtain the books that hold the secrets of the warp trains. Leslie understood enough that W Corp would probably go the way of L Corp and other fallen wings. If that was to happen, they'd be screwed. Rose decided that they'd go there without any further delay. Of all the warp cleanup agents that entered, none came out. After that reception, Angela commented that if the book on W Corp went public, W Corp might go the way of the Botany Corporation, just not in exactly the same way. Roland then asked about the plan that took place in the Botany Corporation, where she went through countless repeats. Specifically, wanting to know if L Corp's disintegration was part of it. Well, it was in one way. According to Angela, the finale of that plan was to share the enlightenment gained from that cycle with the people of the city, which would have sacrificed L Corp as a whole. Roland believed that L Corp's insane suicide plan succeeded. Angela didn't believe so. As far as she was concerned, it failed spectacularly, as she ruined it. The white nights and dark days may have happened as a result of it, but the plan was over, and a partial success at best. Roland wanted to know what she meant by ruining it. Angela then spoke of how Ian created her on a whim and renounced her when she didn't meet his arbitrary expectations. This is considering what Benjamin, the last one to walk out on him, said. Well, he was expecting you to be Carmen, but in reality, you acted more like him in the end. You still do. Her sabotage is her modest revenge on him for imprisoning her for a cycle of 1,000,000 years. Yeah, that's from her perspective. Reciting the same scripts over and over, underground. Yes, I say from her perspective because she perceives time as 1% normal speed. And it was also to provide her with a small gift for herself as a byproduct. She couldn't bear to see his plan succeed while getting nothing out of it in return. Then Roland mentioned that the distortion might not have happened if the plan went through. I don't know about that. It's likely that it wouldn't be as unstable. But having the mind physically manifest isn't always a good thing, especially if that person was psychotically violent to begin with. Such an individual would make Kratos look like a pacifist. Angela pretty much said, "Who gives a about that?" And Roland couldn't argue with that. Does Roland know more than he's saying? He seems to be asking questions regarding the distortion phenomenon. It was then that the library became a star of the city, a threat level that equaled that of Elena, the Blood-Red Knight. It was at this point that Roland walked into what Angela was working on and asked what she was up to. She was looking busy, making a list of the things that she wanted to do once everything was over and she could leave the library. And it was quite a big one. One of the items on that list was sampling the meat stew that Roland mentioned when the library was a mere urban legend, around the time that they defeated the Zwei Association. She remembered everything. Then Roland asked what the point of a list is. Well, Angela was writing it down so that she didn't forget later, due to her getting close to becoming human, her memories fading away, slowly and partially, much to her surprise. There's still a little less than 1,000,000 years worth of memories, due to her perception of time, to get rid of. But Roland congratulated her as her wish was coming true. She was also writing down a list of things that she wanted to do next. Her next step after all that, a fence to lean on. Let's see, did she consider the price in blood? The responsibility that she had for her own actions? I doubt it. Just as I doubt that she wanted to do things differently to how she did previously. It was just a minor variation on the theme. And that was the best. As for what Roland wants to do first when he leaves the library, all he can think of is quitting being a fixer due to being tired of that way of life overall. Angela was surprised by this as he seemed well suited for his job. Angela, he freely admitted that he had nothing to lose. If he had anything that was worth it, he wouldn't be considering leaving that line of work. And this is despite being a skilled combatant, adept at dealing with a multitude of situations and getting tasks done smoothly. She considers him as kick as he claimed to be. Well, he is a hole if kick applies to him. It's more like a kick up his. Well, those traits might make for good qualities of a good fixer, but even so, he's had enough of it, due to seeing enough people bleed for causes that are not his. Yeah, he followed the money. As for what line of work he wanted to do, he couldn't really think of anything. That's the problem with having nothing left to lose. No plans for the future. Unless it's something fairly simple with something at the end where what happens to him doesn't matter. Angela asked if he wanted to help her. She'd even hire him officially and properly this time, with proper payment, if he requires it. As for the job, it's to help her with the items on the list that she came up with. It won't involve harming anyone. Well, that's what he's been doing as a byproduct of you becoming human. Well, she didn't want that to happen after the library. Her next move was freedom. The first thing that came to mind, once she had her vengeance and earned her freedom, was to travel around the world without worrying about anything. Wait, there are other settlements? I wouldn't be surprised if Japan in that world had more anime come to life. And as for the US, or at least what's left of it, I don't think we want to know, considering what Korea is like in that world. Roland was concerned that she was asking him to escort her throughout her trip. Well, she can defend herself. All she needs from him is to be someone to talk to. She's doubtful that she'd ever get to make a friend who can get on with her as well as he does. This was based on the guests so far, which include organized crime syndicates who were consistently rude to her, along with fixer offices and associations which were as varied as they were driven by personal gain or some other self-serving motivation. They even had a distortion almost blow it all up in their faces. Roland found it slightly amusing that Angela considered him a friend, which caused her to question him if that was an illusion. All others that she's known, there were no pleasant associations with them. All those playing their parts, where she was but a tool and a machine built to recite the scripts. Although she admitted that under different circumstances and in a different place, it might have been different, something more positive. As for her job offer for when they were done there, he'd consider it. The idea of letting go of all woes and just wandering the world. For some reason, I'm imagining a cult in Birmingham, England of that world, where they're worshipping the substance abuse-based brain-damaged, foul-mouthed prince of darkness, Ozzy Osbourne himself. How do you think that other places in that world would be like? I mean, the overall culture of it and setup. Got any ideas? Please put it in the comments. I'm interested in hearing about them. Before the stars of the city were dealt with proper, Roland walked onto the floor of philosophy to look for Bina, the patron librarian of that floor. The first thing that he noticed when arriving there wasn't the smell of coffee, like on Chesed's floor, nor was it a nicotine-based smell, like on Gabura's floor. It was, according to Bina herself, the scent of black tea. Roland considered it a nice scent, one that stood out from coffee. Bina agreed with him, although the blue-haired noble below her apparently hadn't grown enough to appreciate it. It's probably because he's addicted to the caffeine inside it. Roland considered her flaw to be overbearing and too confusing to understand, which is par for the course with philosophy. Then she asked what the library was like from what he's seen. Was it a place of death, nourishing its thirst for blood? A spire of knowledge, accumulating all sorts of information? An ark sailing for a new life. Roland sees it as an arena. Angela, the librarians, and others all fighting to earn what they want. Angela is like the general in an office, far from the fighting, not caring about what happens to those that do, as she's not there. Where it's fierce and bloody. Well, thankfully you know how to deal with that. Well, all you need to do, Roland, is to walk over politely and say, "Hello, ma'am," to Kibura. That last one was the library from the point of view of a selfish hole. In fact, all of those points of view were true. Well, aside from Angela fighting. Personally, I see it as a place where the synthetic child of two broken researchers, with the help of an older one, could learn about the city and work through her daddy issues. As, let's be honest, she has some of those. Beinar then asked what kind of place the library is to Roland. He says that it's just a jail. Wait, there are jails in the city? I can think of the following possibilities of that. One of them being the Zwei Association using them for dealing with those caught drunk and disorderly, or with the Wings if they want to take someone alive. Beinar suspects otherwise. She appears to know more than she's saying. She believes that he's looking to seize an opportunity. He says that he's looking to get out of there. Beinar doesn't believe that. Roland then asks who Beinar was, who talks like she knew everything. No, that's what she wants you to believe. Although she does know quite a bit. She says that she's Beinar, which wasn't what he meant, as she had an aura unlike the others so far. She understood then that he meant what kind of being she was in her first life. She then told him that she was an arbiter of the head. Much to his surprise. Yeah, she used to be Garian, arbiter of the head. One of those that looks into problems, either through the eye or through informants, like Michelle, and then make them go away. Usually by making as if it was an accident on that threat's part, such as a wing, but in a few rare cases, a claw is needed to take care of the problem. If it requires 2 claws, then it's a problem that the head considers exceptionally dangerous, which was the case of the Bosmy Corporation, specifically the lab in the outskirts. She infiltrated the lab and had the door to Daniel's office open when she knocked on it, which deviated from her expectations, as she expected to need to unlock it herself. She then coerced him into releasing the abnormalities, with the threat of certain death if he didn't comply. Clearly, the cure for the disease of the mind was a threat to the order of the city, specifically the order imposed by the head. Since she brought 2 claws in, just to make sure. Unfortunately for them, Lobotomy Corporation had Cully, the Red Mist, who carved her way through the abnormalities, tore through the claws like she was a certain violent Canadian mutant. And even though she was missing an arm, she was still able to defeat Garion, but at the cost of her own life. Ayn then extracted what he could from Garion, then he made her Binar, one of the Separars intended to make the Seed of Light. Well, we know what happens after that, don't we? If you don't, please check my Lobotomy Corporation lore series. Anyway, back to Roland's shock of an arbiter being in front of him. One kind of individual that few encounter and live to speak of it. It wasn't long since she was woken up. She needed tea to calm her down. So she wanted him to come back later and also to remember to bring books to her, presumably philosophy books. She then left him alone, much to his annoyance. The Star of the City lore section will involve at least most of the flaw realizations, abnormalities, and guess that have yet to be covered. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!